gets the beat again. Truth is stranger fiction when it gets too hot in your kitchen.
Crazy, like I tried to sail around the world. I didn't even know how to sail. I sank my sailboat in El Salvador. I didn't care. It was like no big deal. I've never been scared in that way.
I am Herschel36. I've got a show called Truth is Stranger Than Fiction on the Beat, 106 FM on the south coast of Spain, and it's awesome to be chatting to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Dave. Nice to talk to you as well. I'm coming in from Acapulco, Mexico.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures and I really want to go. In fact, me and my friend William Genski, who produces the show with me, we are attempting to get our white little asses over to Mexico because you've got some gig going on, haven't you, in February?
Yeah, we're having a conference called Anarchapulco, which is an anarcho-capitalist conference, which is a wildly growing sort of ideology or philosophy. Essentially, for people who don't know what an anarcho-capitalism is, it's two words: anarcho, which means anarchist, and a lot of people don't understand what that word means, but it means no rulers, which means I don't want to be ruled by anyone, and I don't want to rule other people, and so that automatically negates the idea of government, and so you could say I'm anti-government. And then there's capitalism, and that's another word that, of course, has been totally misconstrued. I use the word as meaning, well, capital means savings, and essentially capitalism to me just means free market voluntary transactions that is essentially voluntary trade. And what we have today in the world, of course, in the U.S., a lot of people say, oh, well, the U.S. is capitalist. There's very little capitalism left in the U.S. There's so much government involvement in the economy. There's so much regulation. Of course, taxes are not a part of capitalism at all. And as well, central banking is heinous. Actually, central banking, like the Federal Reserve, is a tenet of communism. So what a lot of people think of as capitalism today is more aptly should be called corporatism or fascism, which is when the government and the private industry work together. And we see that in places like the U.S. all over the place. So it's truly a free market sort of idea. So I believe in total freedom, free market, voluntary transactions. Everything should be voluntary. And that's what our conference is essentially about. So we've got people coming from all over the world, and hopefully you guys can make it as well, to some of the top speakers. Actually, most of the main top speakers in this sort of area will be there, including people like Larkin Rose and Adam Kokesh and people like that, we'll be talking about how we can build a better world and essentially get to the point where we can have 7 billion governments in the world. That's what we'd like to see.
Well, corporate fascism is exactly what we're living in right now, and they're rolling it out. And for me, the Second World War was never... the Nazis were never defeated. It was just they moved from one part of the world into the next part of the world, and we live in a fascist society. I'm pretty certain of that, and I think there's a lot of evidence that would support your position. But I love this anarcho-capitalism, and when I first heard you speak about it, I didn't really understand it. I mean, what is capitalism to you? What does it truly mean to you?
Well, I guess everyone has different definitions, and that's why it's important to define definitions. The word capitalism has been misused so much that it almost doesn't really have any real meaning anymore. Same as anarchism. A lot of people think anarchists are people who throw bombs and who destroy things. And really, the real meaning of the word just means that they don't want to be ruled by someone, which means they don't want a government to own them and tax them and regulate them. And now some anarchists in the past, and mostly anarcho anarcho-communists, just so you know. People who believe in communism are call themselves anarchists, and they have actually violently confronted governments before. But many of the people that we are around and that we like are what, and that's why we use the word anarcho-capitalist, just to define that it's not anarcho-communist, because the people who call themselves anarchists sometimes are often just communists, and so they want to overthrow the government, which in general we're not totally against, but I don't think violently overthrowing a government is the way to go. I don't even think it's possible really to do that. And certainly goes against any ethic I have, which is a non-aggression principle, not using violence unless you're being, people are using violence against you. And of course, government is using violence against you, and that's where this fine line about using violence against the government can come in. But the anarchists in general just believe in no ruler. So these a lot of these anarcho-communists, a lot of these people wear black and wear the black balaclavas and all that sort of stuff. They say they're anarchists, and there's a long story for why they say that. But essentially, they're just communists. So they want to overthrow the government and put in a communist government is essentially what they want to do. So in that sense, they're not anarchist at all. And so that's why we use the word anarcho-capitalist. Now, you asked about what is capitalism. To me, capitalism, as I pointed out, the word capital just means savings. So it's a system, economy based on savings, and that's how it grows. But essentially what I mean by capitalism is free markets. And so we have things today like you always hear about free trade agreements. They're not free trade agreements. A free trade agreement would be one sentence long. It would say this country will not tax or regulate or put import duties on this country, and the other country won't as well. So there'll be free trade. There will be no government involvement in trade. Of course, the free trade agreements we have today, including the heinous Trans-Pacific Partnership, which they're trying to ram through right now, the TPP, which they wouldn't allow anyone to read. You had to go in the U.S., you had to go through armed guards and give up your cell phone and promise not to tell anyone what's in it. And it's literally the size of bigger than a phone book. It's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. That's not free trade at all. So what I'm saying by capitalism is I believe in free trade. I believe that there shouldn't be anyone doing any sort of aggressive violence or theft, and violence is government. So that's how they keep things in check, and that's how they keep the government going. If they didn't use violence, they wouldn't be a government, they'd be a regular business. And theft, of course, is taxes and regulations and import duties and all that sort of thing. So I'm against all of that. I think we should have a world where people just trade freely and don't use violence against other people. And that's essentially what anarcho-capitalism means.
Well, that's fantastic. You know, I know a little bit about the TPP, and I know a lot about taxes. I mean, we all do. We all pay them, and these are the kind of topics that you'll
not all of us.
Well, but that's what you're.
I don't pay them.
That's what you're going to be teaching people, isn't it? Or talking to people about on the 19th and 21st in your conference in Mexico, and you've got a pre-event on the 18th, haven't you? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually got a number of events going on around the conference. And speaking about taxes, I talk a lot. I live a lifestyle called a perpetual traveler or prior taxpayer lifestyle, PT lifestyle. And I talk a lot about that at the Dollar Vigilante, which is my newsletter that I write, to legally live in this world and not have to legally pay taxes. And it's all totally 100% legitimate under the rules and laws of all these governments. You can do that. For example, you're from the UK. So if you were to, and I know you're coming in from Spain, so if you were to spend most of your time outside of the UK, you could declare yourself a non-resident of the UK. And by doing that, you don't have to pay taxes in the UK anymore. So then if what you did is you became a resident in a country that doesn't have any taxes, and there's numerous of those countries, I know it's hard for many people to believe, but there's many, then you would not have to pay any taxes at all. And you don't necessarily have to live in that country. You just have to be a legal resident of that country. And then you could spend most of your time in Spain if you want. So these are a number of the things that I talk about, and we'll be talking about it at this conference. So on the day before Anarchapulco is the Dollar Vigilante Internationalization and Investment Summit, which we'll be talking about a number of these things. We'll have people who are experts on offshore banking, offshore incorporation, getting second residencies and citizenships to do these sort of things. And I can tell you personally, I haven't paid income income tax in more than a decade, and I plan to never pay it again. And it is one of the best feelings ever. And not just for me personally, not having to go through having to file all that stuff and actually be extorted for thousands of dollars. In fact, I think I probably paid close to $1 million in taxes in my life before I realized I didn't have to, and I could change that. It's an amazing feeling, but even better feeling than that is I'm not supporting through my own money all of these wars and heinous things that governments do, and that is why I think I really support anyone who doesn't pay taxes. I hope no one pays taxes. We have to get rid of these governments. To me, the two biggest enemies of mankind are governments and central banks, and to give them or not give, but to not be extorted for money to pay for all of their horrible wars, their giant bureaucracies, which is essentially communism, central planning, a bunch of non-free market, non-private people who are doing stuff and getting paid by stolen funds, which are taxes, is horrible. And then they also spend a ton of that money on all sorts of other schemes, including welfare, which destroys societies, destroys people. So it's an amazing feeling not to have any of my money going towards supporting any of that.
I wanted to ask you about how do I not pay tax? Okay. Now, clearly to do that, we're not going to go into the depths of that, but I'm going to reach out and find out how I get more information about doing that, because I'd like to do that. Not only because it would put more money in my pocket, therefore be able to support my family to a greater extent, but as you quite fantastically put, is our taxes are being used to support the gross domestic product. And right now, that's all about war. So the countries are in austerity, right? So we're cutting healthcare. In England, they're cutting disability allowances and so on and so forth. You go on and on and on. And those bastards are whoever they're called, right? They are talking about the fact that we need to reduce the payments for teachers and so on and so forth. But we get massive budgets to give arms to go out, fight wars in the Middle East and various places around the world. We are killing children, we're killing parents, we're killing women, mothers in Africa, all around the world. In Ukraine, it's supported by the UK, it's supported by the USA and the Western banks who profit from war. And they profit from war and they give us the tax bill. And that's exactly what's going on, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually not even really war. War usually has two armies fighting. What it is the UK and the US and then many of these countries go around and commit acts of massive terrorism in numerous other places around the world, including Syria, including Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. The list goes on and on. You pointed out the Ukraine. George Soros was behind that, along with Hillary Clinton and all these people, to destroy these areas. And it's all backed by these banksters, as you pointed out. And actually every single war that's in modern history has been funded by these central banksters, and they fund both sides of the war. And you brought up World War II earlier. That was totally backed by the banksters. It was created by the banksters. They backed Hitler. In fact, George Bush's grandfather was the head of the CIA at the time, and he was a backer of Hitler. And they created these wars. So World War II, which had, 60 million dead or even more than that, I think, was all just created by these banksters. They constantly want to create these wars and conflicts as part of the military-industrial complex to siphon off billions or even trillions of dollars. And then they finance both sides of the war through a debt, which they create money out of thin air. This is central banking, which is heinous and a crime against humanity. And they finance both sides. And then whoever wins, that's great for them. And then whoever loses owes these banksters into perpetuity. I think Germany is still paying off World War I believe. German taxpayers are still paying the banksters for that. It's a giant scheme. It's the military-industrial complex, and it's been going on now for centuries. And your taxes support that. So anyone who doesn't pay taxes is a hero. They're not supporting terrorism, and that's where we need to get. And that's why we're having things like this conference coming out, the Anarcho-Capitalist Conference. This is the way to a much better world, a much more peaceful and prosperous world, because not only do they create all this terrorism, which they call wars, but they also impoverish most of the entire world through central banking. Central banking is not anything to do with capitalism. Capitalism does not have people who create money out of thin air and loan it to governments and charge them interest on it into perpetuity. And they loan out so much money and the money is all based on debt, so you can never pay it back. So it actually impoverishes entire regions, or in fact, the entire world at this point, tremendously. People have no idea. A lot of people say, it's pretty good today. I've got a cell phone and I can afford, a car and things like that, even though most people have to pay for the car or lease their car and don't even really own it. And then you have their house, which most people take some 30 or 40 or 50 years to pay for. That's because of the central banking system. So we've been massively impoverished because of this system. And so definitely not a supporter of either. As I pointed out, that is mankind's two biggest enemies, the governments and central banks.
That's right, and we need neither. It's just that we are, as a race, as a being on the planet, we are accustomed to having government. We're accustomed to having banking, and the bankers own the educational system, so they teach us that we need it, right? And it goes round like a dog chasing its tail. We never catch a tail. We're always in that spiral. And I think the biggest crime is fractional reserve banking, because I would be a millionaire if I could print my own money and give it to you, Jeff, and say, here's £1 million and you're going to pay interest on that. I mean, that in itself is a crime, and that's what you're talking about, right? And above and beyond that, now they're printing fiat currency and they're giving it to all their mates, and they're not, and their mates aren't paying any interest on it at all. And then they're supporting the stock markets around the world, which are, I think we both agree, in trouble. We've had the worst start to the global stock markets that we've ever seen, have we not?
Well, yeah, the first day of 2016 was market crashes around the world. China was down 5% by midday, so they halted the exchange for 15 minutes just to let things calm down. Then it opened up and it was down 7%, so they closed it 5 minutes later and just closed the exchange for the day. That went through most of the world, and almost all the major stock markets were down a couple percent at least on the first day of the year. And I've been saying that 2016 is going to be a bloodbath in the stock markets. It's actually going to be a complete bloodbath in the economies and in the financial system. What happened in 2008 was just the precursor to what's going to happen in 2016, in my opinion. What happened in 2008 is there was so much debt, so much massive amounts of debt, all because of the system that we're in, especially government debt, and that things has almost collapsed. It almost reached a point of collapse. And all they did in 2008, instead of letting things collapse and then having to rebuild again, they decided to print up never before seen amounts of money, just printed up out of thin air. Janet Yellen and all the other criminals, including Carney now, which Canada sent over to the UK to be their top criminal, printed up massive amounts of money. Even George Soros said in 2009 that the financial system collapsed in 2008. And all they've done since then is print massive amounts of money and go into more debt. And so they're trying to fix a problem that was caused by massive amounts of debt by printing up a lot more money and going into much more debt. And that's where we're at now in 2016. And through all my research, which I've been doing at the Dollar Vigilante, I expect this year could be the year that it really collapses, and much more than 2008. We're talking about probably the biggest event in human history. And if it doesn't happen this year, it's going to be soon enough. It's not going to last more than a couple more years at this point. And so if people aren't prepared for this, they really should be. And of course, most people don't have no clue about this. And this is because, and you brought it up earlier, first of all, the education system, and I use air quotes with the word education. It's a government indoctrination systems and camps that they put children into prison for 12 years and feed them a ton of propaganda. In the U.S., they have to do their Pledge of Allegiance every day. That's thousands of times to swear allegiance to the government of the U.S. Vladimir Lenin, of course, said that if you give me your child for 4 years, the seed I plant will never be uprooted. And now they have them for 12 years in places like the U.S. and the U.K. And then after that, they somehow convinced them to spend a ton of money and go for 4 more years of indoctrination and propaganda. And if they go to take economics in university, they're going to learn Keynesian communist-style economics, which has no useful value at all, and just gets people to continue on with this current system. So yeah, it's this is not going to be a great year, and most people don't know. And another reason is the mainstream media is all propaganda. It's all the same people own the media companies as own the governments, and it's all the financial elites, the central banksters, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, these sort of people. And so when you turn on CNBC, they tell you, oh, there's green shoots, or it's a Goldilocks recovery. I really liked that one when Ben Bernanke said that, because it truly was a fairy tale. It was a Goldilocks recovery. It was completely fake. It was false. They use all kinds of numbers and statistics to make it look like things are okay, but it absolutely isn't. You brought up GDP earlier. This is it has no meaning, this number, but they say that's shows how the economy is growing. It absolutely doesn't. It just shows the amount of money printing that's going on. The unemployment numbers in the U.S., they say it's around 5 or 6% now, but if it was calculated the way they calculated in the 1980s, it'd be over 20%. Of course, you're there in Spain. You know that the unemployment rate for youth alone is over 50%. This system's in a state of collapse. What happened in Greece and what happened in Cyprus is going to happen all throughout Europe, and I think definitely this year. We're going to see France, Spain, Italy, Portugal all go Greece. And of course, they just passed on January 1st a bank bail-in clause for all of Europe. So that's what they did in Cyprus. In the old days, you used to rob banks. Now the banks rob you. And in Cyprus, that's what happened. They got so indebted that they just decided to take 50% of everyone's money in Cyprus and give it to the banksters. They're going to do that all throughout Europe now. It was just passed on January 1st of this year that they can do that legally all throughout Europe. Is if the banks have problems, they can just take their depositors' money. So if you have money in a bank in Europe right now, if you're not running to get your money out of there, you are playing a very dangerous game.
Well, this is very true, you know, and just to go back to Big Bad Ben Bernanke, when he was asked how much money was printed in 2008, he said, well, roughly about 750 billion or something like that. Yeah, because it doesn't really matter how much or how little, because they just print it, right? And and we've been off the gold standard since '72. You know, Nixon brought us off, or brought the US off, the US being the reserve currency, and said it was only going to be for a wee while. I paraphrase, of course, because he wouldn't say wee while, but it's been that way ever since.
Well, actually, he did say that. It was 1971, August 15th, Richard Nixon removed the gold backing away from the dollar. So back then, the U.S. dollar used to be backed by gold, and that's why almost every country in the world used U.S. dollars as reserve currency, because they knew it was backed by gold. But the U.S. got so indebted by the end of the 1960s due to the Vietnam terrorist attacks that they were doing, which was all started by a false flag terrorist attack on one of their own ships, where they tried to sink one of their own ships and blame it on the Vietnamese. It was actually, I believe, Israel who tried to fake it and got him into that war. And by the end of the 60s, I think you're around the same age as me, so you don't remember, but I know by looking back, that people were very fed up with all this war and killing hundreds of thousands or millions of people in Asia for nothing, including outside of Vietnam. They were just carpet bombing Cambodia and Laos. Massive terrorist attacks, again, by the U.S. government, which is by far the biggest terrorist organization on the planet. So people were they were bankrupt. The U.S. was bankrupt. They could not afford to pay back any of their debts in gold anymore. And France actually pushed them and said, we want all of what we're owed back in gold. And they couldn't do it. So Richard Nixon took the gold backing away from the U.S. dollar. And to your point about it being temporary, he actually did say it was a temporary measure. And he said it was because of currency speculators that they had to remove temporarily the gold backing away from the dollar. It's now been over 45 years since then. And I actually do think it is going to be temporary. It is actually going to go back at some point once the U.S. dollar collapses. But that's the state of affairs. And that as well is also why they faked the moon landings at the end of the 60s and early 70s.
Hang on, Jeff. Are you trying to tell me we haven't been to the moon? How dare you?
There's no evidence of that. There's a lot of fake videos. Yeah, that was all tied into that. And then again, they've had on the media, and they do all these movies, so the Apollo movies, and all these movies about space and how the moon and all this sort of stuff. People have no idea how much propaganda and how much the system and how much they think they know isn't true. It's actually pretty astonishing once you realize almost every war in the last modern history has all been started by a false flag attack. For people who don't know what a false flag attack, it's when a government of a country attacks itself and blames it on someone else to go to war with them. That's what happened in Germany with Hitler. They burnt down their own parliament building, blamed it on other people so that they could go to war. Of course, 9/11 was done by the U.S. government and factions of it, and the CIA and Israeli government and the Mossad, and to get them into the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all throughout the Middle East. If you can just go back, and I brought up the Vietnam War, that was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which has all been actually verified and said was done by the U.S. government. They've actually said that themselves, but no one knows this. Every single war that they've ever done, of course, they attacked Iraq for weapons of mass destruction, which they didn't even have, as most people know, but they did used to have them. And the way they know that is because the U.S. government sold it to them, Donald Rumsfeld. People have no idea just how insane and how much stuff that people think is true isn't true, and it's all being run essentially by the same people. And I know it's hard for people to believe, but they really have an incredible propaganda system. And they take out people who try to bring up these things. You look back to JFK. He was trying to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And it was just, and he actually made a speech where he said that there is very nefarious people who control the U.S. government. He doesn't control it. And if people don't stop it, it's going to be horrible. And a few weeks later, he was shot. This is incredibly, there's so much things that people have no idea about. Of course, many people still doubt JFK was killed by that one guy in some library or whatever, one of the patsies they used that particular time. But there's so much going on that people have no idea. And it's, people really need to wake up. And I think people are starting to wake up thanks to the internet now.
But isn't it true, okay, if you tell a lie enough times, or if the lie's big enough, people will eventually believe it. And that's what's gone on for decades, possibly centuries. I know many people who have commentary on this particular topic, because this is the topic right now, will say that the people right at the top, it's not even about money, because they have more money than they can ever believe. But for day-to-day living and geezers like me, right, it is about money, because I need money in my pocket to go out there and start living, paying for school fees, putting petrol in my car, and so on and so forth, the mortgage, and it goes on and on and on. So money's an incredibly important control mechanism, which the bankers print, use, inflate, deflate. They change the velocity of currency around the world so they can crash markets. They've been doing it for years and years and years, and they've been driving down the value of assets. They've been buying assets, which is exactly what they're doing with gold and silver right now, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. There's. I was just thinking about something you brought up there. What was it? What was your general take? I just had a great concept. About money, and it was the Rothschilds that I think it was Mayor Rothschild who said centuries ago, "I care not who creates the laws as long as I create the money," because that's really what controls these governments today. So it really is, and you pointed out, it's not all about money. These people are already fantastically rich. They're already trillionaires numerous times over. It's not about money. It's about power. And they for whatever reason, the people that have been controlling these things for a long time are all about power and control. And they do that through the money system. And that's how they control everything. And, it's just amazing. You go back even to the Bible and Jesus. And when was the only time that Jesus kind of got upset? It was with the people, what do they call them? The money changers?
Money lenders.
Was that what it was?
It's not the money lenders. I can't remember.
I think it was money change. They had some word for it, but essentially the only time that Jesus, this guy who was all about peace and nonviolence, essentially was an anarchist. You could even call him an anarcho-capitalist. The only time that he actually, got angry was at the money lenders, I think, or whatever they called them. So this has been going on for millennia. And it's the people who control the money. And this is what's really exciting for people who don't know is we've now evolved to the point with technology that we can have money that isn't controlled by anyone. Of course, gold and silver is a money that isn't controlled by anyone. It is a money that has there's no credit risk associated with it. When you own gold, it's gold. You own it, and it's worth something. There's no other money like it in the world today, except for one other money that's come out in the last 6 years, Bitcoin. So it's actually an incredibly exciting time. And you hear a lot about Bitcoin, and it's causing a lot of uproar all throughout the world, including with central banks and the financial system and governments. Is because no one can control it. There is no one place. There's no Janet Yellen of Bitcoin. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. So the government can't come in and shut down the Bitcoin office and make it so there is no more Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just math. And so this is really exciting times. Is we actually, for the first time in human history, have the ability to transact globally in real time, instantaneously, with a money that isn't controlled by anyone and can't be controlled by anyone. And this is going to change the world, in my opinion.
Okay, Bitcoin. Let's talk about it, Jeff, because the average geezer on the side street in London doesn't know anything about Bitcoin. It's a cryptocurrency. There's many various options for cryptocurrencies. Now, I'm very familiar with the 10 quid or the 10 euros that I've got in my back pocket. What people don't understand is there's no inherent value in that. It's just a piece of paper with the Queen's head on it, right? But there's no actual value to it. But how would I take my 100 grand in my bank, okay, before the government comes and dips its fingers into that 100 grand? How would I take the 100 grand and stick it into Bitcoin?
Well, first of all, let me just talk about the currency today. So you talked about the British pound. It's pretty amazing how much propaganda and how much control over people they've had, that they've gotten people to continue to use pieces of paper with a criminal printed on it, a terrorist printed on it, the Queen, and they call it a pound, which is a unit of weight. And what it used to mean was a unit of weight of gold or silver. And now they've managed to convince people that these pieces of paper, including the US dollar, which is actually called a US Federal Reserve note if you look at it. And you might also notice there's a pyramid with an all-seeing eye printed on it, which is a Masonic symbol, meaning how they want to control the entire world. No one seems to notice that. But that is what some people say is money today, and that is what most people use as money. But it's what it is what you just pointed out. It has no intrinsic value. It actually it's less value than the piece of paper it's printed on, because it's got these criminals, especially in the U.S., these dead criminals printed on them. So it's actually worth less than a piece of paper. But people, for whatever reason, still to this day use it as money. But that's not going to last too much longer, because these systems are all collapsing now because of all the debt. This entire system is an entire communist central planning style system. And as most people should know, or I would hope they know by now, that any sort of central planning top-down system of control can't last because it's just, there's no way that you can manage an entire economy with just one person at the top who decides. We saw that with the Soviet Union, where they had shoe factories which only made like left-footed shoes and no right-footed shoes, because the guy at the top kind of screwed up that day. So the economy can only run well when it's bottom-up control. So every individual has control of their own, what they produce and how they save and things like that. So we've had the system now where it's been top-down control, central planning, central banking itself is a tenet of communism. Hardly anyone knows that. And you can only have communism with central banking, essentially, because you need to continually print money, because the economy won't be actually producing anything. Excuse me. And so we have that sort of a system, and it's nearing collapse. The amount of debt now, and this system is set up in such a way that it can't last forever. The the money printing, the fiat currency backed by nothing can't last forever because it's actually
Jeff,
printed up.
let me just jump in there. It's not backed by nothing, is it? It's backed by a gun to your head. That's what the petrodollar is all about. It's about you sell your oil via dollars, and we will protect you with our army. That is the case, is it not?
To some extent, it's even worse than that. And in fact, because of taxation, which is a completely criminal act, it's extortion, because people have to pay their taxes if they do pay, and you should be ashamed of yourself if you do pay and should feel bad about it. It's a very immoral act. But if you do pay it, you're essentially paying for the taxes that you're supposed to pay with those dollars or those pounds. And because of that, you need to earn those dollars or pounds, and that creates a demand for that currency. Without that, people would probably not use those currencies. So, but because people still are being extorted all over the world and then forced to pay these taxes, they have to earn those currencies. So these currencies are just not backed by anything. Obviously, there's nothing backing it. But you pointed out there is violence backing it as well. So not only is theft essentially backing it and creating the demand for it, but they actually use violence in a lot of these Middle Eastern countries to continue this petrodollar. And that's why Libya was one of the main places attacked, as well as Iraq. Saddam Hussein wanted to stop selling oil for dollars, which would have decreased the demand for dollars significantly. And it wasn't very long after that they attacked, Papa Bush went in and attacked Iraq because of that. And then it was Libya that was not so much the petrodollar, but they actually wanted to move towards a gold-backed African currency. And it wasn't too long after that Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated by Hillary Clinton, and they destroyed that country because they want to keep people using the dollar for things like that. And of course, which country is being demonized by the West more than any other country at this moment in time? It's Iran. And Iran began selling their almost everything, including oil, for gold. And that is why they've got U.S. military bases surrounding it right now. They want to destroy it because they don't want countries to be doing that. They want them to use the U.S. dollar. So yeah, you have the U.S. dollar is essentially a currency backed by theft and violence, and so that's why Bitcoin's so exciting. It's a currency that's not backed by theft and violence. It's completely voluntary, and no one can control it, and no one can manipulate it like they do with the fiat currencies. So it's a really interesting time right now. And what's going on in the Middle East is a lot to do with the petrodollar, although not completely. It's mostly to do with control. The U.S., the neocons, and the people control the U.S. government, backed by the banksters. They want the U.S. Military to control the entire world. That's why they spend more on the military, the Department of Offense, as I call it, than every other country in the world combined. And they have military bases just peppering the entire planet. You can't almost go anywhere without a U.S. military base. So they're trying to essentially control that entire area. And what we're seeing now, all sorts of problems going on. Of course, they're trying to destroy Syria is the latest one. Now we're getting some pushback from Russia, though, which is very interesting. And that has changed the entire dynamic because, of course, ISIS was started by the U.S. government. It was Dick Cheney and a number of other people started ISIS. And they continue to this day to support them and fund them and drop them supplies all the time by accident. And Israel supports them as well. And then Russia came in and said, okay, you're telling everyone that you're there bombing because of ISIS and you want to take out ISIS, but you're not. So we're going to take out ISIS, which is actually the U.S. government's mercenaries, essentially. And that really got the U.S. mad. So it's going to be very interesting. This is really close to World War III in the Middle East right now. Again, most people don't even realize it. They just think, oh, it's just some problems. No, this is the U.S. trying to take over the entire world, and Russia and Iran and a number of other countries are standing up to them, and China as well. The U.S. couldn't even take out Vietnam. It couldn't take out Afghanistan. It couldn't take out Iraq. They could occupy it, a few square blocks. They could put in a giant embassy and surround it by helicopters and bombs and tanks. But they couldn't even defeat, essentially, those countries. There's no way they're going to defeat Russia and China and Iran. And they're standing up to them. Russia and China and Iran are realizing that if they don't stop this at some point, they're going to be next. And so this is where the flashpoint's happening right now in the Middle East, and all kinds of crazy stuff's going on over there, even including just recently with Saudi Arabia executing over 40 people, including a very well-known cleric that was well-liked throughout the Middle East, which caused a lot of protests and riots in Iran. They burnt down the Saudi Arabian embassy just the other day. All kinds of just crazy stuff going on over there. And it's all being whipped up essentially by the West, trying to cause all kinds of problems. And it's very interesting as well that it's Saudi Arabia. Of course, the U.S. government says, oh, we have to attack Syria because they have such a bad dictator, which in fact, he's not a very bad dictator at all. Just like with Libya, Muammar Gaddafi had the richest country in Africa. It was one of the most peaceful and prosperous countries in Africa, and they took him out. Same thing they're doing in Syria. They're saying that in Syria is so bad we have to take them out. But then Saudi Arabia is their good friends. George Bush and Barack Obama kissed the ring fingers of all these sheiks. And Saudi Arabia is just every day executing, beheading people. And they also are the head of the UN, the United Nations Human Rights Council, the same people who are literally executing and beheading people every single day. Just goes to show just how much misinformation and propaganda there is out there. And the reason is because the U.S. wants Saudi Arabia to continue to exist, at least for now, just because of the petrodollar.
This is right. You know, everything you stated there is absolutely on the money. Everything is backwards. The Saudi Arabian family is an absolute butchery out there. That, you know, it was set up by the British in the 50s. They've been set up to do a particular job, and they're doing that job. And ISIS is an extension of the Anglo-American corporation, and they're there to generate fear. Those beheadings were, didn't happen. By the way, if anyone's listening to this, you have to understand that what you see on the TV in the West, in Europe, is generally speaking Hollywood. Politics is Hollywood for ugly people. But there is a way out. And that way out is to understand that we don't need government. We don't need banking, the big banking cartels, because we live in a cartel. And we don't need to be at war with anyone. There is no enemy. The enemy is within. And this is very clear. This is clear warfare. Because the governments, the Western governments, go in there, they destroy countries. They don't have to win a war. They don't care. It's not their children who go and fight for the country. They send us out there to fight for them, and they call it being a patriot. What a load of rubbish, right? Absolute rubbish. It's a lie from morning to night. It's a lie. They do not die. They do not send their children. They wouldn't even send their children's dogs out there. They send us. And we die for absolutely nothing. And then they go in, they settle, make some form of peace. They rebuild the country, and lo and behold, they put in their own leaders and take over the banking system. And that's been going on for absolutely ages, for longer than you and I can both remember, Jeff. But as you quite rightly point out, and I love this idea that we don't need to pay taxes. If everyone stopped paying taxes, what are they going to do about it? If all the ants woke up, there would be a very peaceful revolution, okay? And I quote John Lennon, you know, where John Lennon, being a hero of mine, he was denied access to America, and he was asked, you know, John, why do you think they keep denying you access? And he said, well, because I want peace, and they don't like peace. War's big business. Okay, it's really big business to sell the arms and so on and so forth. But Bitcoin is an opportunity to take one's power back. I don't understand it fully enough. I really don't. But I do understand this, Jeff, and I think if you could comment on it. I think anyone listening to this, if they're looking at their financial situation, whether they've got 10 grand in the bank or $500,000 or a few million or whatever, okay, I think it's important to consolidate debt, isn't it? Before moving forward with anything else, debt has to go.
I'm not sure what you mean by consolidate debts. I actually think with this inflationary system we have, we're going to head into hyperinflation at some point. So to go into more debt is totally fine. And in fact, you brought up the point about not paying taxes. Imagine this as a world. What if everyone in the world started to realize what was going on, and tomorrow no one paid taxes anymore, and no one paid for their mortgage, no one paid for their car loans, all these things which are created by central banks and their fiat currency money system? What would happen? if you think about it, what would happen? All of a sudden, everyone would be much wealthier. All of a sudden, people would own the stuff that they've been trying to pay for 30 or 40, 50 years because of this horrible system. And nothing else would really change. The government would go away, the wars would stop, and people might start using Bitcoin, they might start using gold and silver, they might use other forms of currency or whatever they want. But we could truly have a peaceful and prosperous evolution overnight if people wake up. It's really about waking up. It's about consciousness. It's about even government itself, when we talk about government, how evil it is, government actually doesn't exist. It's actually just a superstition. It's almost a religion to many people, actually. But you can't point to anywhere. Where can you point and say, that's the government? Where you point at the White House? No, that's a building. Okay, so you point to Barack Obama. No, that's a guy who gets a lot of welfare from a lot of stolen funds, and he goes and he reads off teleprompters. But that's not really the government. What is the government? Government really doesn't exist. But because people believe in it, it's a superstition. And actually, if people haven't read Larkin Rose's book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, they really should. And he'll be speaking in Anarchapulco, by the way. It's just a idea, and people just go along with it. And these guys come around, they say, hey, you owe us money because of the government, and these are your taxes. And of course, you have to pay your taxes. There's only two things in life that are sure. That's death and taxes, which is another propaganda meme that's been going on for centuries. And people just do it, and they listen to them, and they come around, they say, hey, you can't grow that plant in your backyard, which cures cancer, called marijuana. And then people say, okay, well, I guess I better not, or these people will kidnap me. It's a belief. And because so many people believe in it, they can continue to do it. But what happens when enough people wake up and realize that all of this is fake? It's all propaganda. We've all been used. We've all been enslaved. A lot of Americans say that, well, we're so proud that we stopped slavery a few hundred years ago. No, the slavery never stopped. Now everyone's a slave. Now everyone pays taxes. Now everyone is controlled. You can't do anything today without permission. You want to drive a car? Well, you better go ask the government. You want to travel outside of the country? Well, you better ask permission and call it a passport to get permission from your government to ask another government if you can go there. We're all slaves today. But what happens once people realize this and wake up? It could be literally, it could be just literally a few weeks, and all of a sudden the world is an unbelievably better place, much more prosperous. People are much wealthier. There's no wars anymore. Those all just go away. Of course, a lot of people who work for government, I know that's a lot nowadays, for a few weeks, they're going to have a tough time. They're going to have to actually go get a real job and actually learn how to be productive. But in general, the world would be an amazing place. So hopefully people start to wake up. And I think it actually is happening. There is because of the internet, people have access to this information. Before this, you just had things like the BBC, which you get taxed for. So you actually get extorted for to get your government propaganda channel. But now people have other options. It's just a click away. And so people are starting to wake up. And as these systems collapse, and they will collapse, more and more people will wake up. So a lot of people say I'm a doom and gloomer because I say this whole system's going to collapse. No, I'm super optimistic that this system is going to collapse. This system has been holding down humanity to extents that we have no idea because of all the regulations, even things like patents. Patents have held us back on technology by things. There's already free energy systems out there. They keep getting shut down by the government. The government finds out about it, takes out the people who are doing it, and then they try to patent it or whatever so no one else can use that technology. All sorts of things like that. We'd probably be flying around in hovercrafts right now if it wasn't for the government. So just imagine what could happen if people start to wake up, and I think they are. And I think thanks to people like yourself, Dave, and your show, people are getting access to this information, and it spreads. There's nothing more dangerous than ideas.
That's right. It was so beautifully said. And I'm full of hope, and full of God, whatever you want to call it. And I know you can't use that word because it's tainted with so much religion, but it's true. In humanity, we have this spirituality, we have this godness in us. And the system wants us down. And the way you describe it, the system's coming down, and it's fantastic. And so it should come down. My children, your children deserve the chance to be free. And all we've got to do is stand up and be counted. And I love the imagery that came up for when it does come down. And 2016, I mean, can you compare what's taking place today with what was taking place in 2008 when it almost came down, right? And there was the bailouts. Are there similarities in the world markets?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost exactly the same. There's only one difference. It's way, way, way worse now. There's so much more debt. There's so much more because of all this money printing. Money printing actually is incredibly dangerous. Most people have no idea how dangerous it is because it makes people feel richer for a period of time. So they go out and they spend more money than they normally would and they save less. And it actually destroys capital. Because of that. So people have no idea. So that's why all these bubbles, they actually destroy a lot of capital. For example, the US housing bubble, which Paul Krugman, the communist Keynesian crazy person, wanted after the tech bubble collapse, which is all caused by central banking and the money printing of Alan Greenspan. So they print all this money, creates all this activity. Most of it goes to waste. A lot of that money was destroyed. Same thing. So after the tech bubble collapse, then Paul Krugman, is a communist Keynesian, says that, oh, we need to create another bubble. He actually said that. He didn't even mince words. He said, we need to create another bubble, a housing bubble. And they did. So they lowered interest rates, which made people think, oh, it's easier to get houses now. And they printed more money. So people said, oh, we feel a little richer. So maybe we'll buy a house. Maybe we'll buy three. And it's so easy now because they're changing everything to make it so easy. So they create the housing bubble, and then a lot of entrepreneurs and people who have businesses go out and say, wow, there's all this money around. Everyone wants houses. I guess the economy's doing great. So let's build literally millions of houses. So they go out, they use all those resources to build all those houses, and then it ends. The bubble collapses, as it always will, because it was never sustainable. And there's literally millions of houses that were built that actually still to this day are sit empty in the US. So that money was actually destroyed. That was capital and time and effort destroyed through these money printing. And so all that's happened since 2008 is it's just gotten much, much, much worse now. And so the next collapse, I think, will be the big collapse. And if it's not the big collapse, and by big collapse, I mean everything gets wiped out. Everything that you know, every bank every bank you can imagine, HSBC, they're all just gone. Every currency, the US dollar, the UK pound, everything, it's worthless. That's the big collapse, and that will happen. And I don't know if it'll happen this year, but if it doesn't happen this year, it's still going to be incredibly bad, and it's going to happen soon enough. We're not talking decades anymore. We're talking months or years at this point. And there's a saying that it's better to be a year early, day late to wake up to these things, and that's definitely the case. And as I pointed out earlier, if you have any money in a bank account in Europe, I would be running, not walking, to get it into precious metals, Bitcoin, get a bank account at least outside of Europe. People in Greece found that out when they closed all the banks. Many people just couldn't even get access to the money in their bank account. But the people who could had foreign bank accounts. The ATMs still actually worked for foreign bank accounts, so for so-called tourists. But even if you were Greek, you just had a bank account, say, in the Cayman Islands or in Singapore or somewhere else, which is incredibly easy to do. For people who don't know, just go to tdvoffshore.com. That's short for the Dollar Vigilante Offshore. And we help people get offshore bank accounts and corporations. But people need to be getting prepared right now, and if you most people have no idea. They so much propaganda, so much media, all the indoctrination. Even all the kids who go to school and universities learn economics, they're learning propaganda about communism and Keynesianism. It has nothing to do with reality. People have no clue, but it's going to be really bad. And I think this could be, actually is, the most dangerous time in human history for capital. So if you can actually survive this, if you're aware of what's going on, and you pay attention to what we're talking about, if you go to the Dollar Vigilante, dollarvigilante.com, and you sign up for our newsletter and you know what's going on, you can protect yourself. You can get outside of the financial system now, and there's so many ways to do it. You could actually become incredibly wealthy through this entire process, as everyone else is becoming incredibly impoverished, which is terrible, I know, but I didn't cause it. Blame it on Janet Yellen, blame it on Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, the U.S. government, blame it on all those guys. They're the ones who've been doing it for centuries. But you can actually survive it quite well if you have your eyes open.
Okay, well, that's fascinating, right? Absolutely brilliant stuff. I would love to wake up one morning and HSBC was gone from the face of existence. That would be wonderful. And the British royal family, who aren't British, they're not even German. God knows where they come from. Anyway, let's leave that. We're going to have a very short break here, and then I'm going to be asking Jeff some more questions about, how we protect our capital. We'll be back with you in 2 minutes. A lot of the listeners here on the Costa del Sol in the south of Spain, it's quite a vibrant area. Okay, as you can imagine. Okay, there's a lot of tourists, a lot of foreign investment. The construction industry has started again on the south coast. The construction in London is absolutely booming. I want to ask you about the Costa del Sol, but before we get there, a lot of people have got property in London. Okay, a lot of people are and the property market, as you know, in London's going through the roof. Okay, absolutely through the roof. Rentals are through the roof. It's pretty insane. But there's a lot of debt associated with that property. So let's take a two-bed flat that's worth £600,000, and there's £300,000 worth of debt on that. What would you advise to one of the listeners? What would you advise to the listeners in that kind of scenario, if you've got any advice at all?
Well, I should point out that I'm no expert on every single real estate market in the world or anything like that. So there might be certain areas that I might be doing well for actual real reasons, not just money printing. But many of the places, it sounds like London's like that. I know for sure New York's like that. There's many places that have another property real estate bubble booming because of all the money printing and the lowering of interest rates, which are actually now starting to go up in the U.S., which will destroy the entire U.S. real estate market. Because of that, there's I don't know every single market, but it seems like a lot of them are definitely in bubble territory, and it's all because of this money printing. So what happened in 2007, 2008 will happen again, and it will happen probably this year, in my opinion, and it will be far, far, far worse. And so I would be getting out of those markets, especially if they're really in bubble territory, as you're saying it is in London, and I would get my assets into other places that haven't had these bubbles. And there's so many of them. Actually, Latin America is so much cheaper and so much of a better, true, real economy because there isn't a lot of the government involvement in the economy, and they don't have a lot of these banking sort of things. For example, in Mexico, where I am right now, they don't even really have mortgages. So the real estate market is actually real because people can't just go and have a bunch of banksters print up a bunch of fake money to get houses. People actually have to earn the money to get it. So they don't have these giant bubbles in places like this. So, for example, here in Acapulco, Mexico, just as an example, it's just quite amazing how cheap it is. I know one place, they want 1.2 million, which sounds like a lot, but this is literally, it'd be in a rap video. It's used to be owned by the Shah of Iran. This is like a villa that the biggest drug dealer, the drug cartel person in Mexico would own. It's only like $1 million for the same amount in San Francisco right now. I think you can get a 300 square foot bachelor pad apartment in a really crappy ghetto part of town. So it just goes to show the value in different areas. So I would definitely be, me personally, I know enough about London and New York to say this, that if I own property right there right now, I would be looking to sell it yesterday and get the money outside of the UK or the US and get it somewhere else. Get it mostly into hard assets, precious metals, gold and silver, and keep it outside of the US and the UK. Because if you're a citizen or a tax slave of that country, you are owned by that country. They consider you as their property. And as we know, in the US, they've confiscated gold before in 1933. And so when things get really bad, and they will start to confiscate things, and they're already doing that. So you want to get your hard assets outside of the geographical region in which they claim to own you. And so I would get it out and get into precious metals around the world. I'd put some in vaults in Singapore and other countries. And this is all quite easy nowadays, thanks to technology. There's sites like goldmoney.com where you can just wire transfer money there and say which vaults you want to own gold and silver in. And they have vaults all over the world. And you can pretty much within a day have gold and silver in vaults all over the world. Of course, I'd put some into Bitcoin, but not a massive amount, because I think Bitcoin literally could go to $1 million per Bitcoin. It's currently $400 per Bitcoin. I started talking about it when it was $3 per Bitcoin, just so people know. And but I think Bitcoin is still so new. It started in 2009 that it could go, anything could happen. It could even go to zero. So don't put a large amount of your assets into Bitcoin. But if you have $1 million, why not put 10,000 or 20 or 30,000 into Bitcoin, 1%, 2%, and if it does what I think it is, you'll be tremendously wealthy. And if it goes to zero, then you lost 1 or 2%. So it's a high risk, high reward situation. But the great thing about Bitcoin is when all the banks close, and they will, and they shut down controls instituted all over the world, which we already have started, you will have the ability to transact anywhere in the world in real time for no cost with Bitcoin. As example, if you had $1 million worth of Bitcoin right now, and you wanted to buy, say, a factory in China, you could send $1 million in Bitcoin in about 1 second to China for no cost. No one would know you sent it. No one could stop it. No government could say, hey, we want to check this transaction over. The bank can't call and say, hey, that's $1 million. We want to know where you got that money. There's no way for them to stop it. So that's why Bitcoin is so exciting. As well, Bitcoin, as they start to confiscate things, they're going to start to do that. As governments go down, they try to take everyone else with them. They try to take every last bit of wealth with them. We've seen this hundreds of times over human history. They can't confiscate Bitcoin. You can actually hold $1 billion worth of Bitcoin in your own brain just by memorizing your password, and it's not held anywhere. Bitcoin, there's no place that Bitcoin is held. It's actually just math, and it's all over the internet. There's no, you'd have to turn off the internet to stop Bitcoin, essentially, and that actually is something they're considering.
That's
so
right.
this is the where we are at this moment in time. That's why I call it the most dangerous time in human history for capital. But if you're smart, you can do very well through it all.
Well, again, fascinating stuff. You're absolutely right. The threat to cryptocurrencies is if they turn off the internet. I don't know how they would do that, but if they did, or if there was an EMP strike, or we came off the grid, and there was no electricity. I don't know if you can store Bitcoin on a hard drive, but I'm assuming you can.
You can, but you need access to the network to be able to transact it. You actually can do Bitcoin without computers. You just need a lot of calculators, and basically it's not going to work without the internet. So yeah, that's the risk. One of the risks with Bitcoin, and so a lot of people who are hard assets fans, and I am as well. I'm a big fan of gold and silver. I think it's been throughout human history a great way to keep your wealth. A lot of them will say, well, what if they turn off the internet? And it's like, well, I think if they turn off, or they also say as well, they say, what if they turn off the power through an EMP attack, which has been talked about by the U.S. government and other people as a possibility of things they might do. Then what if we didn't have any power? Then what would happen to your Bitcoin? And I always tell them, if we don't have power, you're going to have a lot more problems on your hands than worrying about your Bitcoin. This world is so electronic and technology based now that if there was no power supply, it would look very Mad Max very quickly. And I think as you're running down the street from starving people who want to kill you because they have nothing and there is nothing, and as people are eating each other, I don't think anyone will be talking about how worried they are about how they can't access their Bitcoin.
I think that's very true, and I don't think my son and my daughter will be worried about their iPad not being able to go gaming with their buddies and so on and so forth. So I think diversification is very key for me moving forward in 2016, looking at where I can realize true cash investments and how to give myself some form of comfort and support. And traditionally, gold and silver has been the area to invest in when times have got tough. There's no two ways about it. But I also have a personal food storage place, which I'm building up over time, and other supplies like medical supplies and bits and pieces, fresh water, and so on and so forth, just in case, because I hope for the best, but I definitely prepare for the worst.
Well, in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, global food transportation stopped working for 3 days. It was because no one knew which banks were solvent during that time. It was getting that bad. And because of that, anyone who was shipping did not ship during that time. And as you probably know, most food for most people in the Western world today comes from not down from the farm around the corner. It comes from all over the world. So you literally, if that went on a few more days, you would have seen every grocery store, every Walmart in the US emptied out within a week. And that was in 2008. So these are very, very real possibilities. Of course, not many people think about it because they get all the propaganda. Everything's going to be okay. Fairy tale, Goldilocks recovery. And the media never tells them any of this sort of stuff, but these are real concerns. And like you, I don't sit there and worry about it. Actually, fear is our biggest. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. I think that was a U.S. President who said that. It was a criminal, obviously, because he was president.
Bush Jr. said that.
No, it was way before that. It was back in the 30s. It might have been I forget who it was. Anyway, that actually is a real true thing. There really is nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear is the real thing to fear. Fear destroys everything. And so you don't want to get fearful about all these possibilities, but you do want to be aware of them. You do want to just pay attention and know that these are possibilities. So keep some extra food in your house. It almost shut down in 2008. And if it happens again, and it will happen again, and it's going to be way worse, it probably will end up with grocery stores being emptied out in a matter of days. And then what are you going to do? Might as well have some extra food in your house. This is called being self-independent. And what they've been trying to do now for decades and centuries is try to make people as dependent as possible on things. And so when things really do start to collapse, a lot of people are going to be in a lot of problems. And so if you're not one of them, I think you'd be better off doing that. And what does it hurt you to keep an extra a month or two of food in your house? It's just a good idea in general.
Yes, it is. And when I grew up as a kid, we had a pantry, and in that pantry there was stocks. Food here, food there. Spare runners. Just stuff that my mum and my dad had. And now I've got to go out and relearn that particular technique. And yeah, there's nothing to be scared of. This is life. This is the experience of living. In fact, this is one of the most exciting times to be alive right now. There's so much going on. And as you say, there's so much information. There's good information on the internet. There's also a lot of bad information on the internet, but there's a lot of good information on the internet. And the markets are going to crash at some point. The economies are based on debt, and they can't borrow enough debt into existence to keep the Ponzi scheme rolling. And if I know that Peter Schiff, he said it's going to crash. Harry Dent, who's on the opposite side of that discussion, he says it's going to crash. They both talk about a dollar. One says the dollar is going to fall immediately. The other one says the dollar's gaining strength, and it seems the dollar is getting stronger, which has certain inflections on the global economy. But ultimately, all fiat currencies do collapse, don't they?
Well, in human history, they have, yeah, of course. And if you have nothing backing it, and all you do is print up more of it, essentially, a real good money is something that you can never make more of. That's why gold and silver is quite a good money. Of course, there's mining, but it amounts to less than 1 or 2% of the total stock of gold and silver in the world every year is mined. So it has a natural inflation rate of 1 to 2%, which is nothing too terrible. And of course, that's what the central banks say they want to do. But they lie about the inflation rates as well. They say in the U.S. the inflation rate is less than 2%. They say it's 1% or something along those lines. But they use the consumer price index, and they totally massage these numbers, just unbelievably massage the numbers to the point where it has no bearing on reality whatsoever. True inflation is actually the amount of money being created, and the amount of money being created is still it's around 7% per year right now, but it was as high as 15% a few years ago. It's been averaging probably around 10% over the last 7 years, every single year. That is the true inflation rate. That's the amount of money. And now that money, and this is why inflation is so dangerous, is that money doesn't just go throughout the economy evenly. It goes to certain places first. And that's why these bubbles get built. So they create all this money, and that money has to go somewhere, and it usually all goes to 1 or 2 places. In 2000, it went to internet stocks. In 2007, it went into real estate. Now it's all going into government bonds. And that's creating the massive bubble in government bonds, which is all going to collapse. It's already started to collapse, as we've seen in Greece and places like that. it's just everything that people think is real isn't real. Just turn off your television. It's called programming for a reason. And don't listen to any government statistics. They're all massaged and lied about and propaganda.
Absolutely brilliant. Right. Okay. So let's all agree, whoever's listening to this, one, throw your TV like a rock star out the window. Please don't hurt anyone. Two, never believe anything anyone in government tells you. Ever, because they're not working for you, they're working for the central banks. And three, there is a way forward, and it's really, really beautiful. What we are going to get, once we're through this little tension, it's going to be fantastic. But Jeff, you are very famous for saying that the euro is about to collapse and the European project is about to break up. You're very famous for saying that. And people are asking, well, what's it going to look like if that happens?
Well, we're already seeing it happen. This refugee crisis was all engineered by the U.S. So when they took over a lot of these countries, including Libya and Syria, and attacked all these countries, they created a massive amount of refugees. They destroyed these countries, which used to be wonderful places in general. And what they did was they gave Turkey a lot of money to store a lot of these people. So they had refugee camps there for a number of years, and they planned this all out to release them all last year and just unleash them into Europe to cause chaos in Europe. They want to cause all sorts of chaos. They want to actually destroy the European culture because if you destroy the culture, you can make it so much easier to control people, especially with governments and democracies and things like that. Because people, if you just bring in all these people from all over the world and then drop them into a place, it just totally makes it so much easier. All of a sudden, a lot of these people who came from Libya and Syria, they all now can vote. This is why democracy is so dangerous and evil and anti-freedom, they all, if they say, oh, well, we'll give you more welfare if you vote for us, and they all vote for them. And then just creates this entire communist sort of horrible system. Europe has already been designed, been planned to be taken out. They want to create it into being totally controlled. That is sort of what they want, but they don't want any sort of national sovereignty whatsoever. So everything now, and I think most people in Europe can already see it, is being controlled just by the EU. And the EU even recently said that they're not going to listen to what each of the countries in the EU want when it comes to border control. They're going to take that over. So they've already begun to do that. The euro itself was flawed from the very beginning. It never was going to succeed. Of course, all fiat currencies are like that, but the EU was particularly flawed in that you had literally more than a dozen countries, all with completely different economies. Because Germany, for example, is very productive, and places like Spain and Greece are much less productive. And if each of these countries could at least have their own currency, they could inflate or print money if they want to keep things a little bit better than it is. But by having it all under one currency, it creates all these massive problems, which we're already seeing. And then, of course, we have all these governments and so much debt now. As I said, it's much worse than 2008, that it can never be paid off, and they're all going to start collapsing. And so the euro itself, I doubt it'll make through 2016, really, at this point. The EU and the euro itself will probably have some sort of crack up at some point in the next year. And what happens after that, I have no idea. Anything could happen. They could... there's really no way of knowing. It's actually up to the people in Europe to decide what they want to do. But it's definitely not. I would not be keeping my money in euros in a European bank account right now. I think that's a highly risky behavior.
Great stuff. I think you're right about the refugee situation. Imagine in the Second World War, the Allies were allowing German men of ages between 23 and 28 come into the United Kingdom, to live there. Because at the moment, it's absolutely crazy. This is a deliberate move. You're right about Turkey. Turkey, the infrastructure in Turkey is absolutely booming. Okay, I know that for a fact. And they are in a position on the border of Eurasia. They're actually just outside of Europe. As a European, we need to get a visa to go to Turkey, but it's strategically the channel into Eurasia. and they're using Turkey to distribute guns and move various killers from one part of the world, and so on and so forth. And it goes on. And the whole European Union has been designed to fail because we're moving towards one world government, and so the bankers are looking to consolidate power with every step. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. People, if you're not aware, look it up. This is happening. The tiptoe method of taking our liberties away from us and removing our sovereignties or sovereignty. But it's absolutely fascinating stuff, Jeff. It really is. But there is a solution. Now, you will, at your conference in Acapulco, you will be talking about all these issues and more. What's the kind of lineup that you've got listed? Who's going to be there?
Well, there's a couple different conferences all tied into one. The main conference called Anarchapulco, and it's, as I pointed out, an anarcho-capitalist conference. There's for people who know this sort of the freedom movement, liberty movement, there's going to be most of the big name speakers there. Larkin Rose, as I pointed out, who wrote that great book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. Walter Block, he's known as Mr. Libertarian. He's been a anarcho-capitalist libertarian leader for decades. We're going to have Adam Kokesh, if people know him, Adam versus the Man. Luke Radowski of We Are Change, which is an amazing independent media outlet that actually puts out the truth in news. He's an actual real journalist, and there's not many of those anymore. We'll have Roger Ver, who's known as the Bitcoin Jesus. He's one of the biggest proponents of Bitcoin. We'll also have Ken O'Keefe. You might be aware of him being over there in Europe. He's quite well known there. A very outspoken activist against war. Milo Yiannopoulos of Breitbart will be there. All kinds of amazing people. And then we're also going to have our Dollar Vigilante conference the day before, and that'll be more focused on investment, how to internationalize your assets, things of that nature. It'll be a very interesting event. We had it last year, very popular, a lot of fun on the beach in Mexico, around a lot of freedom-minded people, a lot of people sort of building the new world. A lot of people say that, things are going to collapse, but what's going to happen next? What's going to be the next systems? And a lot of these people are building the next systems, including Bitcoin and cryptocurrency-related things, decentralized systems. For example, there's one person that we had last year. He created an application which essentially gets rid of the police states, makes it so you almost get rid of police. There's actually another app that we featured before that essentially people take control of their own policing of their own emergency situations. They don't have the government take care of it. So these people are building the next sort of world after this current very heinous, oppressive, centrally controlled world and money system all collapses. These people are building what's next.
I'm really excited about your conference in Mexico. It sounds as if you're bringing together the key leading minds on that will be discussing how to build the new future for the next generation. How do people get further information about your conference, about the vigilante, the Dollar Vigilante, about yourself, and what are the dates of the conference?
Sure, yeah, it's called Anarchapulco. It's really hard to spell. It's ANARCHAPULCO.com. If you type it into Google, you'll probably find it. It's on February 19th to 21st in Acapulco. The day before is the Dollar Vigilante Internationalization and Investment Summit, which will be held on February 18th. And if you just go to the anarchapulco.com website, and look in workshops or summits, you'll see that there. And for people who are interested and enjoyed this sort of what we've been talking about, this is what we talk about almost every day at the Dollar Vigilante. Just go to dollarvigilante.com. If you see on the front page, you can just put in your email and we'll send you our blog every day. If you're into YouTube, just look up the Dollar Vigilante on YouTube. We put out a lot of videos there. We have millions and millions of views. If you're into this stuff, you should check it out.
Brilliant. Well, Jeff, thank you very, very much. If you don't mind, could you just leave us with a little bit of information? Who is your favorite US president of all time?
I don't like any president. Obviously, they're all criminals. They all run a violent organization based on theft. But I guess if I had to pick one president that I liked more than any of the others, it would be William Henry Harrison. Most people haven't heard of him. That was back in the 1700s. 1773 is when he was born. He was president for 30, I believe it was 32 days. He was incredibly sick the entire time. He did absolutely nothing, and then he died. So that is my favorite U.S. president.
And that's the kind of presidency we like. Listen, Jeff, thank you very much. I'm going to do my best to get out to Mexico in February. I really, really want to be there. I'm just so excited about your work, about what you're doing, and the people you're working with. Every single name that you've got on your list is an absolute must listen to. So thank you very much for supporting humanity, mate.
Thank you, Dave. Peace.
Hey, I'm Herschel36. Thanks for watching Truth is Stranger Than Fiction on the Beats. You enjoy it? Thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, people. Brought to you by Just Finish It Records. Wicked. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Herschel36.